Hey everybody, Dr. Rob Silverman here. I'm excited. I'm here with chef extraordinaire, Vanessa Musi. I am so excited to have her. I want to eat some of your desserts. I want to
Oh,
be
thank
healthy and eat
you.
your desserts. So tell us about your desserts. I'm pumped.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Yeah, well, I pioneered healthy baking over 30 years ago when nobody was doing it, inspired with my story of hypoglycemia and prediabetes. And I just was born with a sweet tooth and started baking when I was 7 years old with my mom making brownies. So I think I'm an expert at baking brownies. So I would give you my brownies to try first. And I have all iterations of brownies, gluten-free, paleo, vegan, keto, every sense without sacrificing texture and flavor. So I think they're life-changing. And I'm also known for my scones and cookies. So most of the products I make are like, travel friendly. You can take them to the office, you can take them to work. It's just, you can take them to the airport, that kind of thing. So yeah, we'd love to have you here in our school.
I'm coming. I'm on the first flight out. Your school's
Yeah,
in Austin. Am I
Austin,
correct?
Texas. Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
you've got a fascinating story. I mean, I read your bio two or three times and I was really
Oh,
touched. I
thank
mean,
you.
how were you able to, you need to give a little background on your story, kind of glossed over it. It's so compelling.
Thank you.
But, in 1992, you said that you had passed out, but you were able to break into a field that traditionally did not have healthy desserts. That's almost like a misnomer.
Yes,
So
it is.
tell us how you broke in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hit a glass ceiling, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And it was 1992, like you said. Thank you for reading the bio so many times. Yeah, I was 23 years old. I was studying to be a chef. I had just changed careers from psychology to chef, and I had finally found something I was really passionate about. And it took me a while. I mean, I was a late bloomer, and I discovered that baking was my thing, that I really was passionate about food. I was, kind of born savoring the world, like literally everything I do is around food, but it didn't click until that age. And everything I'd done before was related to food. So, that kind of, I traveled around Europe. I'd worked in different places related to food as a server in France and Paris. So everything was connected to food, but I didn't realize that baking was my connection to the world and my passion of purpose of life, right?
Mm.
And so I was studying to be a chef finally in Mexico City in one of the best, schools. And it was, like I said, 1992. It was one of the first chef diplomas in Mexico, a culinary career. And they didn't have the pastry world part, kind of, it was more on the savory side. It was 2 years. And for the first month, you had to go and practice in a restaurant. You had to do an internship in a restaurant to gain the skills of, the real life, right? So
Mm.
then I think that was my first week or something of that first month. And I blacked out in that
Mm.
restaurant. And I fell down, I split my head. And back then they
Mm.
didn't have the mats that we use in kitchens. They had like wooden crates. That's what we stood on. So
Mm.
that's where I split my head. And woke up in the hospital and I was like, oh my gosh, something happened terribly because it was hours and hours later. And the doctors were like, well, what's going on? I mean, they ran all these tests. It wasn't my heart, it wasn't my head, it was nothing that they could see. So, but I felt so sick and so like I knew that something was massively wrong because my energy was really bad. And I just had like, I was dizzy, I had headaches, and I'm like, it's kind of like an out of body experience, but it wasn't, you're not yourself. So my sister suggested that I see an alternative doctor. In Mexico we had, I don't know if in other parts of the world, but and they looked at your iris and they said, well, this is what you have. So I went to this kind of healer doctor and he said, well, you have reactive hypoglycemia,
Mm.
and so he was one of the first doctors who asked me, so what do you eat? How do you live? What are you doing? What does your day-to-day look like? What are your meals? And he said, well, you're eating a lot of carbs that burn and you burn them really fast. And you're a chef and you can't be standing up all day and you're probably eating the wrong things and it's a lot of stress. So he said, well, you've got to change careers. I mean, you can't be a chef. And I said, well, I just changed like a month ago. And he said, well, you've got to find a way to live this life differently. And anyway, that started that planted a seed, and I discovered, like, instead of me changing careers, I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it my way. I mean, that was a long path, to be honest. It took many years, and it was very windy. It was not a straight path. So I had to kind of decided, and it kind of clicked inside in different ways with different people, with different connections, that first of all, I love pastries. Second of all, I was really good at, my palate's so good. I think when you're born with a certain skill, you have to develop it, and it's just a natural thing, right? So I realized that I was going to do whatever it took to make the pastries that I could eat and people like me could eat. And so that was my goal, to just make something that was super delicious, nutritional. It was, it didn't have that crash and burn of sugar, because I went through that
Mm.
and I fainted 9 times. So I knew what low blood sugar is, and I know what high blood sugar is. So I really wanted to keep something stable, energy wise. But for me, that had to be delicious, because I was trained with French pastry chefs, and I've traveled the world trying pastry, so I know what a good pastry tastes like.
So essentially, you had a life-changing moment, and they told you
Yes.
that if anyone knows anything about reactive hypoglycemia, it's it's like the mountain drop. It's up
Mhm.
and it drops, and that's why you passed out.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
very happy you didn't listen to the conventional answer, because now you're here, and I'm going to be able to benefit by eating. I've got a little bit of a sweet tooth,
You
but I
do?
love
Yeah.
the fact that you don't use real sugar, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But your
Yeah.
story is so compelling, because in the natural world, it's always what somebody does for us or what we have to do for ourselves to get us to
Mhm.
the other side. And what you did was great. And now you're making all these dishes for everybody else. So it really
Yes.
begs the question, what's healthy baking?
I know, right? I mean, and that's still a question I ask myself every day, of course, because there's a fine line, and there will always be a fine line between the taste, the palate, the texture, the consistency, what kind of sweetener, how much sweetener, I mean, the flours, how they convert to your body, who is it for? It could be very, what's the word? Questionable, right? I mean, because we can look at it so many ways, and you're the expert at that part. Um, so for me, healthy baking is using alternative flours, alternative sweeteners, which don't give you that crash and burn. They don't raise your blood sugar high. I use a glucose monitor myself, so I kind of measure that. I measure the pastries and how I feel. Like, usually when you eat a traditional dessert, what happens? You have like a sugar rush, especially with people who are insulin resistant and who have a background of diabetes in their family, or I mean, we have these genes, right? They can be triggered pretty easily, I think. So my dad died of diabetes, so I realized that was in my family, and my uncles had that. So that was a condition, right? So it doesn't give you that. When you eat a traditional pastry, your blood sugar goes up pretty fast, right? In both the flour and the sugar, because there's regular flour. There's regular flour that turns to sugar, right? Nobody thinks about that. And then there's sugar, and there's a lot of sugar. A lot. I mean, that's the first thing. So it's a really big and quick spike of sugar. So what happens is your blood sugar goes up. So you start to feel great at one point, but that's like a few seconds. And then you have like this sugar rush, kind of like if you had a drink, right?
Mhm.
And then you go up and you have a high, but that high, especially in sugar sensitive people, and more than other people, it goes down really fast. So it goes below what you started with, so that sugar crush leaves you feeling with a headache, you're dizzy, you want to go to sleep, you're lethargic, I mean, it's a crash and burn, right? So that
Crash and
happens in
burn.
regular pastries, right? And there's no nutritional value, and there's no added bonus of that. It's just a pleasurable thing, which comes and goes. It's like, that's the pleasure that goes away pretty fast, right? So
Mm.
and most of the pastries in that regular world, maybe they're not that pleasurable because they're just sugar, you know? So it doesn't satisfy the nutritional part of it. And it also, you might just taste the sugar. You might not taste the other stuff. If there's pineapple, if there's berries, you might not taste that because sugar is on the maximum ingredient, right? So in my world, the healthy pastries, what I've done is remove that regular flour, remove that amount of sugar, reduced the amount of sweetener, and using alternative sweeteners like coconut sugar or maple syrup in small amounts, or allulose, or some alternative sweeteners like Lakanto, Swerve. I use a very small amount, and the key is how much do you use and how do you combine them, because if you overuse that, it doesn't really taste good. So if you overuse like erythritol or the flavor, I don't know, I'm sure you've tasted a lot of keto products out there, especially the packaged ones. The flavor is not great, right? It's not something you think, oh my God, it's delicious, right? No, there's always like a sacrifice of flavor, and there's always an aftertaste, and it's always like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I'll have to eat that because it's low blood sugar, or it's zero carbs, or it's zero glycemic, right? But it doesn't really do much for you, right? It's not something you're like, oh my God, it's like a traditional dessert, right? So I've tried to replace, in my desserts, something that you tasted and you think is as good or better than a traditional cake or pastry or brownie or cookie. That's my competition, right?
Right.
I'm competing with traditional cookies. Let's say if you go to Starbucks and there's a product that you like, some of the pastries are really good, and you think, I want to replicate I don't know, the pumpkin cake bread is really good. So make it in a better way that's not that crash and burn. And there's ways to tweak recipes with better products. And of course we do different lines, right? We do the paleo line, the vegan line, the keto, sugar-free, the diabetic line. Why? Because we have different audiences, and some people want different things and they want different flours, right? So, but the bottom line is that they're less of an impact, right? And we've had people test them, thousands of people around the world, and they said, oh, my dad who's diabetic had no problems, or my mom who's diabetic can eat this free. I mean, with no after, no different effects, right? So that's kind of my.
Well, I'm going to let the secret out. We tried some of your desserts.
You
So
did?
let me let everybody know that they taste not as good as the regular commercial stuff. They taste better. So they're doctor certified for health. Now, you mentioned, because everybody cares about how dessert tastes, your dessert is yummy. But the real question is, which of these flours are you using that are so gluten-free? Because gluten-free is critical, because we all know that gluten leads to gut issues.
Yeah.
There's a gut-to-brain axis, there's celiac. I'm a big believer that all my patients should be gluten-free. So what alternative or other option ingredients are you using in the flour?
Well, I'm really glad we talked about that, because there are a lot of options, both we have a huge audience in Mexico, Latin America, and in the States, of course. But now, after 30 years, I can finally say there are a lot of options, because when I started, there was like hardly anything. So, I use everything from garbanzo bean flour, which works really nice. Almond flour is the base of a lot of the recipes. And almond flour works beautifully because it just gives us that light texture, and it just bakes really well. And it's really an easy one-to-one substitute from regular flour. And you can make a chocolate cake that looks and tastes as good as a regular chocolate cake with regular flour. Coconut flour, I use a small amount. I'm not crazy about it, but I use it as a structural element in just a low amount. What else do we use?
Teff.
Yes, teff, ivory teff works beautiful. That's not a one-to-one, it's a half substitute. So you have to combine it with almond flour, but it just makes amazing cookies, banana breads. It's beautiful because a lot of protein, a lot of iron. It's great. It's a great flour to work with. Oat flour combined, especially with almond flour, works beautiful. Cassava flour. I like the blends, like the Bob Thread Mill blends of gluten-free flour that's got sorghum. Those kind of flours work beautifully as well. It kind of depends on the recipe, because I try to stick to the nature of a recipe. What works best in this recipe that's not gonna, it's gonna have that essence. If it's a banana bread, it's gonna be moist. What flour works best for that recipe? Because if you just generalize, you're going to have the same textures, or it's going to be or too dry or too moist, or that's not the best flour for that product. I was able to work a lot in recipe development. So I had that kind of scientific approach. to that, like what do I tweak here? What are the proportions, that kind of thing. So I'm this is kind of like a baking lab when I'm testing recipes to make sure that so I will try a recipe like 4 or 5 times before I make it real, right? Because I'm so convinced of like how much flour, how much sweetener, how much cocoa powder, tweak it. I tweak it a lot to make it really spectacular, I think.
So you listed like 6 or 8 different types of flours. One of the things that I run into with many of my patients when I say go gluten-free, which talking to you, you're looking at me like, come on.
That's easy.
That's easy. Even the Delta Lounge when I fly is. So everybody, you heard the master chef, the supreme chef say, come on, guys, it's easy. As a matter of fact, it tastes good. Not only does it taste good, it tastes better, but you're using health promoting flours that aren't as calorically dense, but they're much more nutrient dense. They've got prebiotics. They've got some fiber. So they supply a specific thing because I don't count calories when I talk food with people. I count chemicals. I count clinical outcomes. The only thing I'll say is if you use a table sugar like sucrose, it's pure calories and there's nothing in there. That said, I want to segue to these alternative sugars, artificial sweeteners, rare sugars, because a lot of people, it's critical that it tastes sweet. It lights up a part of their brain in the reward center of their brain. So talk a little bit about the alternatives that you use to white table sugar, which I nicknamed El Diablo Blanco.
Yeah, good name. Yeah, one of the poisons of the humanity, right?
The bane of my existence.
The bane of our existence, yes. I mean, for years, I'm like 32 years, honestly, since I started baking with my mom when I was 7 years old, and we started doing healthy recipes when I was 16, from like alternative cookbooks that my mom would bring from LA and that kind of thing, whole grain, molasses, different sweeteners. So now everybody looks for the perfect sweetener, right? We all want that, and that's a question I get asked every day, all day, probably 50 times a day on social media and classes. We all want the perfect sweetener, and the perfect sweetener does not exist, unfortunately, because nothing really bakes as well as sugar and nothing really tastes as good as sugar. I mean, like we still have to crack that code, honestly. And I think there's a niche and there's an opportunity for the industry to create that perfect sweetener. And we've all strived to do it, right? I mean, every company you can think of has strived to create a sweetener as good as sugar in the sense that it caramelizes, it browns, it creates structure, it has moisture, it has that sweetening power. It just makes everything in every sense, like yogurts, ice creams, breads, all that makes it perfectly, right? We have great alternatives. What do I use? I mean, I use maple sugar. That I make myself. It's cheaper than buying it at Amazon or whatever. So that's one option. And the key is to use a small amount. And the key is also to use, because remember when you're doing a pastry, I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with me, you don't just isolate the sweetener from the pastry. You're eating the whole thing, right? The body's assimilating everything that's in that recipe or that muffin or that cookie. I mean, you're just not separating the sweetener in your body, right? It all is impacted, right? It's all a package. So, I mean, that's why the flours also, and the fiber and the nuts and the seeds they also impact the blood sugar, right? So it makes it less if you're using all that. So I try to incorporate that as well. There's fiber, there's nuts or seeds. There's something that lessens the sugar impact as well. But anyway, I use maple sugar, maple syrup in small amounts, not like the first ingredient, it's kind of like the third or fourth ingredient, not the first. And it's also combined with other flours. I use coconut sugar, but not a lot. What else do I use?
I'll hit you. You go thumbs up, thumbs down. Why?
Yeah.
How does that sound? Ready?
Yeah.
Do you use stevia?
No, don't like it. I mean, I don't like the flavor. It's just the bitterness, the flavor, the off taste. It's overpowering. For me, it doesn't taste well. It's got an aftertaste. For me, it gives me migraine, so I'm highly sensitive to that. And I mean, everybody's bio-individual, different, right?
How about monk fruit, lohengao?
That I used to bake with like years and years ago, but just as a one ingredient, I don't use it. Like it's so pure and so intense, and it's 300 times sweeter than sugar as a one ingredient, as monk fruit per se, And now they sell it combined, so they need a vehicle to bake with. So that's erythritol. So like Lakanto is one of them. I use that, but in small amounts and in different recipes. And I think the secret is and you'll probably agree with me that in nutrition, you have to rotate ingredients, not the
Sure.
same sweetener, not always, not freely, not like some people would just, I mean, you're not going to eat everything with that, right? And it's only a small amount, because if you use more than half a cup of that, it's going to crystallize a product, and it's going to give you an off taste and just a thick coating of crystallized texture on your pound cake or breads. It just doesn't bake it that well, right? So I used like a third of a cup.
Coconut sugar. I think you mentioned that coconut sugar was okay.
Yes, I love it. I think it's great.
Well,
Yeah.
let's get to the gold medal winner. I
Yeah.
know you're smiling. You know what's coming.
Yeah.
Allulose.
Allulose. I love it. Yes. Yes. I love allulose. You have to learn how to use it. I mean, because it's not, you have to test it. I've tested it for years. It's amazing in ice cream, cheesecake, beautiful. Caramels, beautiful. It's like there's no aftertaste. There's no side effects in that sense of like, oh, it's going to give you a migraine. It's going to give you like a certain stomach issues, unless you're highly sensitive to that, or unless you're eating a lot. I think it's just, if I give somebody a cheesecake made with that, they would never know the difference, right? I just say, here's a cheesecake. They'll try it. They think it's sugar, but it's made with allulose. Allulose works great in cooking applications. So the best jams are made with allulose, like a chocolate sauce, a lemon curd, that kind of thing. Those applications work beautifully. When it's not that great is in cookies, brownies, cakes, because it doesn't have that crispy factor. It doesn't, it's very soft. So when you bake, it makes everything soft. So let's say I make a cookie, instead of having that crispy texture outside, it's going to be like a muffin. Which is not that great. And it's also less sweet. So sugar is 100% sweet. Allulose is 75% sweet. So when you bake with it, you'll notice that difference. It's like you taste it like, oh, but there's something missing. It's not sweet enough, or it's not pleasurable enough, or it's not. So the ratio is 1 cup of sugar to 1.25 cups of allulose when you bake with. So when you bake like a muffin or a chocolate cake, we just did a series of recipes for RX Sugar and my YouTube channel. So I made a chocolate cake, and I had to make like 6 or 7 recipes, like literally, to understand how it bakes and to have that exact amount. So it's not crumbly, it's not too soft, it's sweet enough. Yeah, so because everybody wants to taste it as you taste sugar, right? We're all comparing that. So the texture and the flavor are super important. So allulose is great, and I think it's going to stay here for a long time, and it's a beautiful sweetener, and hopefully there'll be another product that also has that crispiness, and which we also need.
To piggyback on what you said about allulose, it's a rare sugar.
Yeah.
It's not quite as sweet as sugar.
Yeah.
70-90% of its caloric content does not get absorbed by the body, so it has no effect on glycemic index. It's a GLP-1 agonist, which is great in that also slows down the impact of sugar. In addition, it could be construed, or properly so, as a prebiotic. And like you said, you can cook with it, and it gives that Maillard reaction, that browning effect. Now, I don't cook, I leave that for the experts like you and my wife, who next to you is the greatest cook in the whole world. I do I do want to have some so when I'm done with this. That said, it's interesting. One thing people always ask is, hey, if you don't use gluten, because gluten means glue, everything sticks together, how do you get the pastry? How do you get the cake? How do you get it to stick together and not fall apart? Because that's like one of the knocks on gluten-free. It's like you lift it up and it comes into crumbs.
Great question. And I think that's something I kind of do naturally, and I don't think about it too much, but we just made a chocolate cake which became kind of viral, and we have over 1,000 students online. So it's one of my bestseller classes, and it's kind of like my dream to have made that chocolate cake. It would have been the cake that my dad would have, fainted over, and it's just that combination. I mean, literally it's just almond flour and the sweeteners and oil and eggs. So the eggs are a great binder sometimes, and again, that's also questionable. We use a little bit of xanthan gum, but just a little bit. That could be questionable. Some people are sensitive to that, or it's maybe not that great for the gut, right? Tell us what you think about xanthan gum. Do you use it? You like it?
I'm a balanced guy.
Yeah.
So risk reward. They're going to eat a dessert. No one's going dessert free in their life. Nobody's more rigid than I am, and I like desserts and I like sweetness.
Yeah.
So if the only thing you do is that much gum or guar gum or
Yeah,
xanthan
it's
gum, I am signing
insignificant.
off on it and saying it's okay today because it's
Yeah.
that ultra processed food in your community, my community, and where we live here in the US that poses the issue. And what you're supplying is not ultra processed.
Mhm.
So let me dig in. I'm curious. My mouth was watering. What are your best recipes? Could you share some with us? My wife's got her pad and paper out.
Yeah, I mean, like telling you the whole formula or just the title.
Whatever you'll share, we'll take.
Yeah. Oh, well, gosh. I mean,
Because
and
you're in the
some of them, I
kitchen
mean,
now.
most of them are, you can find them on my social media, of course.
Okay.
Well, I have these breakfast cookies that I love. They're made with oats, almond flour, almond butter, chocolate chips. We had a neighbor over once
Mm.
and he ate like four of them. So I guess that they're amazing, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the cookie that I think you take to work, you take to the office, you take to the airport kind of thing. I love that recipe. That's on my social media everywhere. And we just made that cheesecake with passion fruit with RX sugar. That's beautiful on my YouTube channel. And I think that was like, oh my God, because you taste it and you think passion fruit is so exciting, right? It's sour, it's like a punch of flavor. That I think that was a great recipe as well. What else? My husband's here. I'm sure he'll have other ideas. My keto brownies are life-changing as well. I think those are great, and they're made with almond butter, collagen powder. I think those are great because
Yeah.
we also are lacking protein, right? I mean, that's something when we have sugar issues, there's always, I think, an underlying issue that we haven't used enough protein, right? Oh, I'm
That
sure
was a
you,
question I was going to ask you. I wasn't trying
yeah,
to put you on the spot,
yeah,
but somebody had said they were wondering when and if you could add a protein source and
yeah,
now make this beautiful, healthy pastry, use the word
yes,
pastry,
yes.
but this substance is food and add protein and make it sort of like a complete snack or a complete meal.
Well, I wouldn't say it would substitute a meal, but for me, when I've always done this and I've fainted 9 times with sugar, I realized, like looking back in my life, that I was missing protein, right? I wasn't eating enough. I was more on the vegetable carb side kind of thing. And I've always loved vegetables, but there was always not enough protein. So I wouldn't substitute a meal with it. I wouldn't do that, but I would add protein. And I think that's a trend that we're seeing now in social media and everywhere. And I think that was in the Expo West, one of the things where there are a lot of protein. At a certain age, we need more protein, right? And so if you look at it, we don't have enough protein in breakfast. We don't have enough protein in lunchtime and dinner, but some people just put in one meal, but that's it. What happens with the rest? So, and it just doesn't, and it sustains your energy. So I realized, like, if I eat an egg for breakfast, my energy is more consistent and I don't have these sugar spikes. So how would I add protein to my desserts with, collagen powder? Even that's not a complete protein. We know that, but I make some with protein powder as well. And there's a product, I don't know, what is your favorite protein powder? Do you have a favorite?
I use a collagen, my wife, we
Yeah.
use collagen in our coffee and she uses collagen to bake with,
Mm,
because I'm anti-dairy and so I
mm,
don't use whey and casein. It's fine
yes.
if somebody else
Yes.
does. I
Yeah.
really think you spoke to the protein question by saying you incorporated eggs. I
Yeah.
believe, and I know you do as
Mm,
well, eggs are a superfood. So you're using whole eggs, of course. I noticed I
yeah.
looked in your recipes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't see too many were egg whites. They were
No,
eggs.
sorry. Yeah.
And you're really 100% right on. It's very funny. Uh, I'm not going to try and deviate, but we were talking about this. Nobody knows food better than master chefs like you. And you guys can definitely stand in as a nutritionist because you can tell us what kind of oils to use that are healthy and which bake the best, what protein sources, because if it comes together well and
Hmm.
it doesn't last for a long period of time because it has a preservatives, it's probably a super healthy food. But I
Exactly.
know everybody's going to want to know, where can they get copies of your recipes?
Well, my website, vanessamusi.com. I mean, that's the best resource because we have online, we have hands-on. They can book a class, they can come to a hands-on class, they can, create a private class. They could go on YouTube, get and sign up there, subscribe. There's the recipes there in English and in Spanish. There's recipes on Instagram. I mean, we have content both. We try to have both languages. It's not easy, but yeah, it's always a challenge. But yeah, I mean, you can also, back to the protein, they could also incorporate protein powder. I don't know if you had this pea protein, which is called nutritious. That's one of my favorites. And again, I look at the ingredients and all that because it's, what tastes good, what I don't use whey, I don't use that kind of stuff. So I try to add, things that create a better energy, like flax seeds or hemp seeds, that kind of thing. So that's another binder element as well you were asking about. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about. It's fascinating, right? It's just the
Well,
world.
you mentioned a school that you have a school. I think it's the first school of its like, and I think it's in Austin, Texas. Am I correct? Could you expand
Yeah.
upon that a little bit
Yeah,
for
you,
us?
you can see it back here. Yeah. So I started literally in my apartment in Mexico City teaching students. That's kind of was my preschool, if you want to say. And I had 60 students a week for 5 years. So that was my school in my apartment. And I like, can you imagine? I mean, that was crazy. And then when I moved to Austin, almost 12 years ago, I started teaching in my house, and then that exploded. And I thought, you know what, it's not functional. We need a place. So then my husband and I bought this property in East Austin, and it's just great because we just built a metal structure. It's kind of like a light industrial, and it's just a great commercial kitchen where we do training, recipe development, classes online, team building, everything food related, and launching products, and just great. I'm working on recipes every single day, like literally those recipes turn into online classes or social media or content for people like us, right? Yeah.
What's your inspiration for some of the recipes now? I mean, we know your inspiration for becoming this quintessential healthy chef, but what's your inspiration? I mean, how do you think of a new brownie recipe, let's say, a
Yeah,
muffin recipe?
that's on my mind every day. Many hours it takes. There's like a real estate of recipe development in my brain all day. So let's say, for instance, somebody sent me these pastries from Taiwan yesterday, and I got this in a mailbox, and I'm like, this is a surprise. And it was a friend of mine from Mexico. He said, you've got to try these. And these were like, shortbread with a pineapple filling, which was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I've got to recreate it in a healthier way without sugar and all that. So that's kind of like in my mind right now. We travel a lot. We took a trip to Paris, and we visited every pastry shop, chocolate shop, boulangerie, and my mind was exploding. So I always think, how do I make it healthier? I go to Starbucks when they launch a product, or I've done recipe development for Starbucks in Mexico. I mean, that kind of thing. What is a product that I would eat that people like me would enjoy? That's my inspiration in just tweaking that recipe or making it better. And restaurants as well. What else? Stores like Erewhon, Whole Foods. I mean, you can't get enough of the traveling, but and I just dream about flavors. I just think, what are the combinations? What would I marry that ingredient with what? That pairing of flavors is constantly something I think about, and I can feel the flavors before I make a recipe. I mean, that's crazy, right? But I do. Yeah, I mean, I can feel it in my palate. What goes with what, or I got it from my dad. I have like cravings. I mean, I've always had cravings for things, and I'm like, now I have a craving for this, or now I have a desire for this. So I get obsessed about a product, let's say brownies, and I make all the types of brownies in different ways, or scones, and I make 100 scones, and like, which is better, what combinations. And then so I create like a master recipe that I could tweak and then make it different ways. So it looks like there are different recipes, but there's one recipe that's like a master formula. And from there, you can do different flavors or that kind of thing. So that's kind of my obsession.
What would you want everybody to know about you?
Wow, I knew that. I kind of knew that question was coming at some point, and I wasn't really prepared. But let's see. I guess a lot of people don't ask me that. Like they ask me like how to substitute, how to do this, how to do that. But they're all kind of superficial questions. I think like it doesn't ask me about me. Who am I, or what do I like? I guess like who is Vanessa really behind the chef? Who is she really? Because I don't think a lot of people know me as a person. They knew me as a chef, and like she does this great recipes. They're amazing, blah blah blah. But they don't know me, like maybe my character. Who am I? what I think about, like what bothers me, what excites me. And I think I would like them to ask me about my personality or who am I really, like who is a Vanessa behind the chef kind of thing. That's what I would like to be. And responding to that is I'm a very sensitive person. I'm really hardworking. I'm pretty driven, and I'm driven in a way that like I have to like, I guess, do a lot of things. I don't relax until I do them. It's like I have that inner drive, which has always been really big, and I'm pretty determined. And my husband says I have an obsessive nature, kind of like an addictive personality in the sense that I like to find this property for the school. It took me 1 year of Googling until 3 in the morning for every day for 3 hours. So if I dive in like big, like I do it big. I'm obsessed about that kind of thing. So
You're all in. We call that over here a type A
a
personality.
type A,
Ding, ding,
yes,
ding, ding. I
yes,
can
yes.
relate to that.
Yeah, you can relate. Yeah.
So before we leave, if you had to tell somebody one thing to change in their approach to baking for health, what would you want them to change?
An approach to baking. Well, good question. I mean, maybe it's before that, but I would behind that, I guess. For me, what really helped me is do not add any added sugars to anything. Because that's a question I get asked a lot every day. Like if I have a tea or coffee or lemon juice or like a lemonade or lemon with some, I don't add sugar. No form of sugar, no form of sweetener, nothing. No added sugars to anything, not even to the dressings or the food or the, like I don't eat the barbecue sauce. I don't need no added sugars, right? Because that creates an expectation of sweetness in your life all day, all the time, right? So I'm going to have dessert. I'm going to have dessert. That's my only sugar, right? So that changed my life in my palate, in my sweetener expectation, in the way I see food. I want to go eat something savory. I don't want to have sugar in my food. I don't want to have sugar in my vinaigrette. I don't want to have sugar, so I think that's important because if not, you're always expecting a sweetener of some sort. Can you imagine? There's sugar in your coffee, sugar in your lemonade, sugar in your tea, sugar in your milk. I mean, there's always sugar. So that doesn't really, and that changes. I mean, that's like a fundamental change I did, and it worked beautifully. And in baking, I would say understand the fundamentals of baking because a lot of people don't understand the role of ingredients. What does this sweetener do? What does this flour do? Take a class, learn, put your hands in, understand the role of each ingredient is really important. And I was fortunate enough to do that with the best chefs in the world to understand how does almond flour work? How does oat flour work? What happens with these fibers? How do they get absorbed? That nature is beautiful. It's a beautiful scientific world, but we need to understand the nature of what happens with that. What is the role of the ingredients? If you know that, if you're interested in that, I think it changes the world because you see it in a different perspective. You learn a lot more. I think, like as in anything, if you go behind understanding just the details or the specifics, if you understand the whole picture, you understand the product better. And the same goes with your body. If you understand how you feel, how that affects your body, it's so much better to create or understand health, right?
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Avoid added sugar. Start with that.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Use good, wholesome products, gluten-free. Use excellent choices of alternative sugars.
Yeah.
And of course, follow your recipes because they will make an indelible mark on your palate.
Exactly. Thank you. You said it
It's been my
beautiful.
pleasure.
Yeah. And what would
Expect the
you
brownies
do?
in the mail.
Yes, exactly. We need some brownie mail. What is your response to that? What would you say? What would be the thing you would change? The first thing you would change for the health to make health better?
It's a great question. I guess that asked this truly all the time, and it would be take away the ultra processed foods. In America, 63% of the calories that we consume are from ultra processed foods. Most of the ultra processed foods is added. A lot has added sugar or high fructose corn syrup, which we didn't even talk about.
We didn't.
That is so common in typical baking. I think we should definitely step into that. but
Yeah.
I would, without question, just limit the ultra
Yeah.
processed food. If you
Mm.
do that, you're on your way. But I guess now that we brought up the fructose, let's cover that. You don't use any of that.
No, I don't. Yeah, no, no, no. And I
Thank
think like
God.
no, I've probably hardly ever have used it. And I mean, and I know in the baking world we use glucose, we use high fructose corn syrup. Yeah, that's a big no. But a great way to substitute it if you need to use that, which is in my baking is minimal. Allulose syrup works beautifully to create that moisture or that extra texture. So that works great in caramels or in chocolate ganache icing of a cake, or if you want to make like a jam or like a fruit glaze or something, you can add a little bit of the RX sugar liquid sweetener. That works amazing, and it mimics that texture and thing without those harmful effects and without that sugar. And I don't know if you know that, but in Mexico they used to give babies that corn syrup in their formula.
Wow.
I mean,
And
that was crazy. Yeah,
that's crazy. The
crazy.
allulose actually comes from figs and raisins and
Yes,
molasses.
yes.
So that's why it's got the texture like you talked about, the
Mhm.
consistency.
Yeah.
Again, I don't cook. I'm just a consumer and a fan. But this has been great.
It's
I
been great.
really hope that you could post some of your recipes. So some, I know it's easy to find you, but like
Yes.
one or two Dr. Rob special recipes,
Yeah, we'll do
things
that
that
for
you do.
sure.
I love
Yes.
that.
Yes.
It's
Well,
fabulous.
tell us what your first choice, what would be your dream recipe?
My dream recipe or my dream dessert?
Dessert. Dessert.
Well, I'm a muffin guy.
Yeah. Okay.
But you said no muffins with allulose, so I'll take a brownie.
Yeah. So I mean, would you choose allulose over all the sweeteners I mentioned?
I would choose allulose. I think it's your best choice. That would be number one. There are a few others that you mentioned that
Mm-hmm.
you could also use. My wife does use some coconut sugar.
Mm-hmm.
I do
Okay.
watch my carbohydrate intake,
Mm.
because
Okay.
it's the macronutrient,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yes.
Chocolate being either dark chocolate or most predominantly cacao. I guess we
Mm-hmm.
should have signified that. I know that's what you use. I went through
Yes.
all your recipes, the other day. So if you could do that and you would add something, I wouldn't want a banana because I personally try to avoid bananas, but if you make it, I know you're not going to give me a bundle of bananas. It's going to be one or less, so it won't spike my glycemic index.
Yes.
So a little cacao with a little banana. You write it
Mm-hmm.
down for me.
Yes. Yes.
A
Sounds
little
good.
allulose. Did I miss anything, dear? Oh, almond flour for sure.
Almond flour.
Yeah,
Okay.
almond
Yeah.
flour would be a great choice. You know what? The great thing about the almond flour is they peel away the seeds. So you get
Mm-hmm.
the almonds. So you're getting all the prebiotics in the almonds and you're getting the protein of the nut.
Mm-hmm.
And almond is a very high protein nut and it comes with a lot of medicinal ingredients. So if you gave me that, I like it simple. I just want it hot. I don't like it frozen.
Yes.
So if
No.
I ask
Yes.
my wife to make me a chocolate pudding,
Yeah.
I'm like, sweetheart, can you make me a chocolate pudding? I want it hot. I mean, it's scalding hot too. It's not
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
warm. I don't
Yeah.
want the pudding. I want it like hot chocolate, but with a little thickening. That's a thing about the thickening in those kind of dishes that are
Yes.
quite challenging for a lot of people trying to stay on the healthy side.
Yeah. I'm envisioning like a brownie skillet, like, melting, coming out of the oven, right?
I'm on my way over
Yeah. Yeah.
now.
It sounds good. Yes. And a little bit, I like the banana almond. Yeah. A lot of people, you don't realize that almonds have to be peeled. Thank you for mentioning that. It's really important. What else is an almond peel that you don't like?
Well, the other thing that I like about peeling the almond is that if you're really going to want to go wild and crazy, you can soak them.
Mm-hmm.
So then by soaking them, sprouting them, you're bringing
Mm-hmm.
all the nutrients to the top.
Yeah.
But again, that's a little time consuming for a lot of people, and baking is time consuming. My question is, how long, once you have all the ingredients to put it together to bake it?
Well, for me, it takes, first of all, it takes me a long time to develop the recipe, right? That, like I said, 4 or 5 times. But once I've
Mhm.
scaled it or measured it in a tray, the scaling takes me 20 minutes, right? To scale everything laid out in a tray with my mise en place, what I call, prepare it. And just baking it takes me like mixing and baking, it's like 10 minutes, right? I mean, they're not considering the baking time, which might be 15, 20 minutes, but just mixing it is like 5 minutes, right? I always joke that I did a show in Brazil, and they said, okay, well, how long is your segments of cooking? Like 10 minutes. Like, what? 10 minutes? I thought they were an hour. No, because they're scaled. They're already, I'm just going to mix them. I'm going to put them in the oven, right? So it's pretty fast. They're simple, they're practical, they're accessible. They're not, they're not like huge. I went to a French pastry school, so those were time consuming because there were many elements. There were French desserts. It took a lot of time. They're very elaborate, but my recipes are very practical, very everyday kind of thing. So kind of imagine a coffee shop type of product, like a high-end coffee shop product.
Outstanding.
Ready to go, ready to eat. I mean, they're not frozen. They're not, they're not cold.
What kind of apparatuses do you need to bake your recipes? Ovens, toaster ovens. Remember, I don't cook, so
Oh
Rob
yeah.
in the
Well,
kitchen.
so convection, you see that convection oven? That's a house oven. I mean, most people have that, right? And that's a regular house oven. People think it's industrial, but it's a house convection oven. And then here I have a Thermomix right there. So I use that. That's my food processor, mixer, blender that does everything. So I can turn it into a food processor. It's also like instead of having a KitchenAid mixer as well, that does everything. So it does 28 things in one. It cooks, it makes my caramels, glazes, everything. I use those two all the time. As far as utensils, they're very straightforward, just like a whisk or a scale. You need a scale, of course. Everything has to be scaled. So yes, yes on the scale. I mean, we have a whole list. I did like an online shop so people know exactly what to get. And for me, there has got to be a return on investment. Things that are going to last a lifetime or generations. I mean, that kind of thing. You're going to get one whisk, get a good whisk that will last forever, and it's going to be just amazing, right? I've always looked at that functionality of things, like invest in good quality. For me, the equipment is as important as the quality of the ingredients. I mean, like literally, because you're investing in something you're going to use, and it's got to be functional, and it's got to be a great product, right?
I love what you said.
Yeah.
Invest in the apparatus and invest in the product, because
Yeah.
health is wealth. Your biggest asset in life is your health, and
Yeah.
everybody loves desserts, and you've able to change people's life and trajectories.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
that's exciting. That's
Yeah,
good.
it's exciting.
Hats
Yeah.
off to you.
Thank you, Chef.
Everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Thank you.
Chef Supreme, Vanessa Musi. You're a healthy baking chef. Dr. Rob Silman, Proven Health Alternatives. We'll see you soon.